The settlers called it a stone tomb. Some called it a fortress. Most simply laughed. Every afternoon, they watched 18-year-old Ethan Walker carry another armful of field stones from the meadow to his little A-frame cabin. Stone after stone, day after day. By autumn, this cabin looked less like a wooden house and more like an ancient cairn wrapped around a log home. Trying to build a castle? One rancher laughed. Another shook his head. He's wasting all summer moving rocks. Ethan never answered. Because he wasn't building walls. He was building winter. When the temperature later plunged to 40 below, those same stones would quietly prove every joke wrong. Ethan Walker lost his home at 18. His father had trapped beaver across the northern rivers. His mother kept a tiny schoolhouse. Within 2 years, both were gone. The cabin passed to Ethan's older cousin, Roy. At first Roy let him stay. Then a failed harvest left the family struggling. One evening Roy finally admitted the truth. I can't feed everyone. Ethan looked up from repairing a wagon wheel. I've worked every day. I know. I've chopped wood. I know. I've hunted meat. I know. Then why? Roy stared into the fireplace. Because winter doesn't care how fair life is. The following morning Ethan packed everything he owned. A bedroll, his father's axe, a crosscut saw, a carpenter's hammer, cooking pot, lantern, $41. Nothing else. For nearly 3 weeks, he searched the foothills. Most cabins were too expensive. Others stood in wind-blown valleys. Some leaked badly. Finally, he discovered an abandoned A-frame cabin tucked beside a rocky meadow. Small, simple, structurally sound. The owner had disappeared years earlier. The property sold cheaply. Ethan spent nearly every dollar, leaving only 6. The little cabin already had thick log walls, a steep roof, a sturdy chimney. Most people would have considered the job finished. Ethan didn't. While gathering firewood one morning, he noticed something strange. Large field stones scattered across the meadow stayed surprisingly warm long after sunset. Curious, he touched one, still holding the day's heat. His father had once explained why rocky hillsides melted snow first every spring. Stone remembers the sun. The words returned instantly. That afternoon, Ethan rolled the first stone toward the cabin. Then another. Then another. Instead of piling them randomly, he carefully built a second wall several inches away from the cabin itself. Not touching the logs, just surrounding them. Tom Grady stopped beside the meadow. What exactly are you building? Ethan smiled. Another wall. Tom looked around. You already have one. I know. So why build another? Ethan picked up another heavy stone. To catch sunshine. Tom laughed. I'll admit. He scratched his beard. That's a new answer. The work continued for weeks. Every stone was carefully chosen. Flat pieces formed stable courses. Rounded rocks filled gaps. The wall gradually rose waist-high around the cabin. Between the logs and stone shell remained a narrow air gap. People noticed immediately. The boy's gone crazy. Maybe he doesn't trust wood. He'll spend all winter stacking rocks. Ethan ignored every word. Instead, he focused on details. He left ventilation openings near the bottom. More openings beneath the roofline. Air could move slowly through the cavity. Moisture could escape. The logs remained dry. The stone wall never actually touched the cabin. Tom returned one evening, carrying venison. He slowly walked around the unusual structure. It almost looks like an old mountain fort. Ethan laughed. Maybe. Tom touched one sunlit stone. It's warm. It was warmer an hour ago. Tom looked puzzled. So, the wall loses heat slowly. Tom frowned thoughtfully. Ethan continued. The cabin isn't just surrounded by wood anymore. He tapped the stone gently. It's surrounded by stored warmth. Tom nodded slowly. I never thought of that. Neither had anyone else. By early autumn, the stone shell completely surrounded the cabin. Only the front door remained exposed beneath a sturdy covered entryway. The structure looked unusual, ancient, almost as though the cabin had grown from the rocks themselves. Inside, Ethan noticed something remarkable. Sunny afternoons warmed the stone wall. Long after sunset, the air inside stayed noticeably steadier. Temperature swings became smaller. Cold nights felt shorter. Even without a roaring fire, the cabin remained comfortable longer than before. Tom visited again after the first hard frost. He stepped inside, then looked around. The fire isn't burning very hard. Ethan smiled. It doesn't have to. Tom removed his gloves. The cabin feels different. Ethan nodded. The stone keeps giving back what the sun stored. Tom slowly smiled. I think everyone underestimated this place. Unfortunately, winter hadn't spoken yet. The weather rider arrived before the first major snowfall. Nobody welcomed weather riders in late autumn, especially worried ones. The entire settlement gathered outside the trading post. The exhausted rider climbed from his horse. Ice coated his beard. The northern settlements are already below 40. Silence spread. Below 40? Someone whispered. The rider nodded grimly. And falling. Nobody moved. Then came the warning. The cold wave behind it is unlike anything we've seen in decades. He looked across the crowd. If your house loses heat. He paused. Your firewood won't be enough. That evening Tom climbed the hill one final time. The little A-frame cabin stood wrapped inside its strange stone shell. Golden lantern light glowed softly through the windows. The rocks still held traces of warmth from the fading afternoon sun. Tom looked around. The cabin everyone mocked. The stone wall everyone called useless. The place no one believed could survive a real winter. Then he looked toward the dark northern sky. You staying here? Ethan rested one hand against the massive stone wall. The fieldstones. The quiet air gap. The simple idea no one else believed. Then he smiled. I think these rocks have been practicing for winter their whole lives. Outside, the first heavy snowflakes drifted silently across the meadow. By morning, the deep freeze would begin. The storm arrived before dawn. Not with heavy snow. With bitter cold. The wind drove temperatures so low that exposed water buckets froze solid before sunrise. By evening, snow followed. Then more. Within 2 days the meadow disappeared beneath towering white drifts. The stone shell surrounding Ethan's cabin vanished beneath snow until only the roof and chimney remained visible. Inside, Ethan quietly added another log to the stove. He waited. Normally a cabin cooled quickly whenever the fire died down. This one didn't. The warmth lingered. The air stayed comfortable. The thick ring of fieldstones surrounding the cabin slowly released the heat they had absorbed from both the weak winter sun and the warmth leaking gently through the cabin walls. Instead of escaping into the freezing wind, much of that warmth remained trapped inside the protected airspace between the logs and the stone shell. On the second morning Tom Grady arrived. He pushed through chest-high drifts until he reached the covered doorway. The moment Ethan opened the door, Tom blinked. I expected to freeze. Ethan laughed. You can still do that outside. Tom stepped in. He slowly removed his gloves. Then his heavy buffalo hide coat. The fire's barely burning. Ethan nodded. It doesn't need to work very hard. Tom walked to the window. Outside the storm howled. Inside the cabin felt calm. No cold drafts slipped through the log walls. No icy wind rattled the interior. Tom placed one hand against the inside wall. It's warm. Ethan smiled. The stone keeps the wind away. Then he pointed toward the floor. And the air between the walls slows the heat escaping. Tom looked thoughtful. So the logs stay warmer longer. Exactly. The third day brought worse news. Several families had nearly exhausted their firewood. Not because they lacked enough wood. Because their cabins lost heat so quickly they burned twice as much as usual. That afternoon frantic knocking echoed across the porch. Walter and Ruth Dawson stood outside wrapped in frozen blankets. Behind them came a widow named Sarah carrying her young son. Our cabin won't stay warm. Without hesitation, Ethan stepped aside. Come in. The little cabin became crowded. Yet something unexpected happened. It grew even more comfortable. The warmth from several people remained inside, instead of disappearing into the freezing wind. The stone shell and insulated air gap held it surprisingly well. Even the stove needed fewer logs than anyone expected. Meanwhile, Ethan's neatly stacked supply barely seemed to shrink. His stove burned steadily but gently. The cabin simply refused to lose heat quickly. On the 9th morning, the weather rider reached the settlement. His horse had nearly collapsed climbing the ridge. After warming himself inside Ethan's cabin, he slowly looked around. I've crossed 4 valleys. Nobody interrupted. I've seen cabins burning twice the wood they planned. He glanced toward the windows. I've seen people sleeping beside their stoves because every other room froze. Then he rested one hand against the warm log wall. And now I've found a cabin wrapped in fieldstones. He smiled. I believe I'll remember this one. 3 days later the sky finally cleared. Sunlight returned. Snow glittered across the valley. Families emerged from their homes. They immediately noticed something strange. While many cabins had huge piles of ash beside their doors from constant fires, Ethan's woodpile remained surprisingly large. He had burned barely half the firewood everyone else expected. Spring slowly arrived. Snow melted from the meadow. The stone shell emerged once again, exactly as before. Solid, unmoved, patient. One afternoon, Roy climbed the hill carrying a small wooden box. Inside lay the family photographs Ethan thought had been lost. "I should have believed you'd find a way." Ethan accepted the box quietly. "We both learned something." Roy smiled. "I certainly did." Before the next winter, builders from neighboring settlements visited Ethan's cabin with wagons, notebooks, and measuring tools. They studied the stone shell, copied the ventilated air gap, collected field stones from their own meadows. Soon cabins across the valley began wearing quiet rings of stone. Not because people wanted houses that looked unusual, but because they remembered the winter when one young man wrapped an ordinary A-frame cabin in ordinary rocks. The settlers believed Ethan survived because he had built stronger walls. The truth was simpler. He built a cabin that didn't hurry to give its warmth away. Sometimes the greatest protection against winter isn't making a bigger fire. It's giving yesterday's warmth a place to stay until tomorrow arrives.